So, welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. Today, we are going to hear about the book Amazon Grace by Mary Daly, and it's being discussed by me, Jo Brew. It's a 2006 book, so it was written in 2006, so it's one of the I think it might be the final book that Mary Daly wrote. I'm just going to put my chat up so I can see um, if anybody adds to that. Yeah, so 2006, it follows many other great books: The Church and the Second Sex, Quintessence, Beyond God the Father, also Pure Lust and Gynecology, and which were written quite a long way before that. Now, this book has a lot of allusions or memories of some of the vocabulary and some of the ideas from previous books. So if you do read it, it could well be a good idea to read Gynecology at least beforehand, because you'll definitely get more from it. And it's almost like read Gynecology, Pure Lust possibly as well. So here's a picture of Mary Daly, and you could see that this is on the back of the book, that there's a sort of like blurriness of on the left-hand side of the picture. And I think this is purposeful to sort of say, I think she knew she's getting quite old and wouldn't be with us forever, and is partly thinking about how we would relate to her. And it also really links up with the themes of the book, of the interconnectedness of feminist thought and women's writing and our sort of meta-patriarchal life. So in the book, starts off with acknowledgements. Then there is the challenge of the book. Chapter 1, the desperate leaping hope of radical elemental feminism. So interestingly, at some stages she calls it radical elemental feminism, and then she often goes back to mentioning radical feminism, her normal sort of description of her own feminism, but elemental feminism sometimes she mentions. Then, beyond hopelessness, extraordinary triviality. So outside the ordinary, and there's ideas about trivia and what the use of triviality. First and final cause, she who attracts. Realizing the courage to hear, name, and create nemesis. What terrific shock will be shocking enough? Quantum leaping ahead back to lost and found continent 2056. Amazingly, is coming up quite quickly now. The trans-temporal exchange of information and strategic discussion. Then women's space and Amazon Grace, self-destruction of patriarchy and the re-emergence of female power. Seeing through phallocracy's biggest lies and reversing its rotten reversals. These are ideas that really come up in Pure Lust and Gynecology. Seeing the animals here and there in the light of the Brontosaurus, and then facing the current mass extinction, rising to the challenge of reclaiming biophilia. Back again, more on inclusive transcendence. A late night conversation with Matilda, as Jocelyn Gage, focusing on the present together, keeping hell at bay, the Armageddon election, that was the 2004 Bush election, the slide toward theocracy, moving forward with thoughts about tsunamis, Bushites, and the theocratic right. Then a wider perspective on tsunamis, the sweetest word, and we can stop it now. So that's what's in it. Right, so starts off with this. The challenge. Oh, by the way, I don't think I'm going to be able to read the chat at all. So I'm not being rude, but I just can't see I can read it. So the challenge of the book, Amazon Grace, is a challenge and an invitation hurled out to daring, desperate women everywhere. In this malignant time, the rulers of patriarchy multiply divisions endlessly. They impose multiple blindfolds, stroke mindfolds, upon women, rendering us unable to see the artificially constructed walls that cut us off from ourselves, each other, and the natural world. I have named this state of escalating division diaspora, meaning exile, scattering, migration. I mean, I always find Mary Daly just incredibly moving and inspiring and nourishing. Um, I think I mean, also having read the other her other books, it helps to really get the depth of what she's saying. Um, because you know the vocabulary and the concepts, but it's very beautiful and very, I find very beautiful, very poetic, and massively inspiring. Feeling you, it makes me feel much less alone and yeah, linked up, interconnected. And then also it's a joy, it's just a total joy to read her work. So she carries on: wild wise women can learn to seize the dreadful diaspora as an outlandish opportunity. Migrating, voyaging women can be like stars in an expanding universe. This ever intensifying magnetism of seemingly isolated women can draw other stars together. So you can see how it goes. It's she's starting off sort of in this very sort of inspirational way. Right. I've got loads of slides. I'll read out various bits. She says in the challenge of this book, in order to hear these connections, it's helpful to read out loud these words. For readers who cannot hear written words in their heads and feel them as they read, it's especially important to speak them out loud. This is true in the case of poetry and also in the case of my books, for words are elemental sounds and cannot be fully grasped by merely scanning pages of print. So I guess the message is we could possibly read these books together, or read them out loud to our cats or to each other. And I know that there are some book groups where women meet and read bits of Mary Daly out loud. And you know, reading this here reminds me that that would be something I'm really interested in. Also, that I don't know of any audiobooks of her work, Mary Daly's work. And if anybody does know, that would be amazing. But that might be something that some of us could get together to do, to create a couple of audiobooks of some of Mary Daly's work. Right, next one, chapter 1. I think that's chocolate on there. When I was reading it once, I was eating chocolate. The desperate leaping hope of radical elemental feminism. In this chapter, I undertake an analysis of our current experience of radical elemental feminist diaspora, using clues from quantum theory, Aristotelian and Thomistic philosophy. Seen from a quantum perspective, dissipation, the process by which energy fades away, can be understood as playing a role in the creation of new reality. Dissipation is part of a process by which a system lets go of its present form in order to re-emerge in some forms better suited to the present environment. Now, a thing that's fantastic, I find, about Mary Daly is that she uses and talks about Christianity, and also she's using, in this case, male scientific theories and, like, say, quantum theory, and she uses them as, in her words, springboards to give us answers, to inform radical feminism and our work. And because we are so sort of trained and schooled in, or certainly I have been trained in, the patriarchal philosophy and politics and science and Christianity, um, it her sort of use and rootedness in, but then escape from these theories is very healing and also sparking. So she uses the word sparking, particularly in Pure Lust, that some of the ideas can spark sisters. We can spark each other to move forward and move out of the being trapped in some of these philosophies. So I think it was her situation that she knew a lot about these, but she is moving beyond them, and so she criticizes some of these theories and then uses some of the ideas from them to create different opportunities and understandings for us. Okay, so she says our movement must re-emerge in forms better suited to the demands of the present. The escalation of the takeover by the oppressors of women is worldwide. The new forms that will be assumed by re-emerging radical feminism must take into account both the extremity of the atrocious conditions under which many women now struggle to live and the global stealth campaign that often keeps the majority of women, even the majority of feminists, in a smog of unawareness and denial. This involves daring to know and name the ways in which our victories are now being used against us. The hope that we can do anything about this state of betrayal and reversal requires faith in the fabric of unseen connectedness. And I mean, this is so interesting, this fabric of unseen connectedness. So she starts going into these areas that are sort of outside normal understanding, or certainly maybe my normal understanding, but she moves into sort of slightly unspoken areas, and makes connections. She's always mentioned that in her other work, this interconnectedness and the unseen connectedness. She goes, at a level we can't discern, there is an unbroken wholeness, an implicate order in which discrete events are united. Effecting changes in small places, seemingly small changes, is ineffably important, for this enables us to work with the flow within that small system and thus have impact elsewhere, which is very hopeful, because often we feel like, what's the point of doing small changes? And she's sort of knitting together parts of our understanding, and saying, yes, let's go for it. Let's do these. Let's be part of the unbroken wholeness, and in our small victories. So that's very nice. Right. So she says this is a newly understood way of moving towards attaining critical mass. Unseen connections make it possible to create effects at a distance. This observation matches a rather ordinary experience. Women sometimes do not share a common language to name our experiences, but the commonality is recognizable in our descriptions of comparable events in our lives. The process of coming home together outside the alien territory of phallocentric institutions is recognized by wild women as abrupt, uncomfortable, unpredictable. And then she carries on a little bit later, the snatching away of wild women's spaces, our jobs, our classrooms, our bookstores, our books, the places, times required for cosmic conversations can serve as an incentive. So the snatching away of that women's space, which we're living in now in multiple ways under the Taliban, the snatching away of women's right to go outside, to talk, have classrooms, and then the transgender ideology, which snatches away our wild women's spaces we're living in now. So much of what she says is incredibly, important today. So she goes, opening the doors to new alignments in space. I mean, that's really good that here we are doing our webinars all the time. These are certainly new alignments in space, and I bet you Mary Daly would be absolutely thrilled with what we're doing, taking advantage of this opportunity to link up internationally in sisterhood. Having been thrown off balance, wild women can find new opportunities to regain our proprioception. So the sense of where we are in space, here and now. In other words, we are challenged to realize our participation in being in the widest, wildest sense. This happens when we confront and transform the specific circumstances in which we find ourselves. So well, I'll just read it, carry on. The experience of moving out, of leaping off the boundaries of the pseudo-secure, pseudo-reality hurls us into touch with the universe in a deeper way. We reach existential understanding of the truth suggested in the language of quantum physics that unseen connectedness makes possible quantum leaps. So it's very interesting and very inspiring. I love books that I read and they make me think of completely new things or see things in a new way. And particularly if they're amusing and very healing and positive. And then it certainly makes me feel part of a sisterhood because I agree with pretty much everything she says. So it is really fantastic. And I'll, just for people who haven't read much Mary Daly, she capitalizes some of the words like um, being. So being, she makes some words more important as radical feminists and says these are sort of should be capitalized because they matter. So being is a very important word for her, of saying that it's a verb. We are verbs, we're not objects. So we are, it's the doing that is the thing. And there's loads she says about that, but I like it. And then she splits words a lot of the time, sort of puts the being to emphasize, I suppose, her meaning and let us see more inside the words, you know, how we've been objectified, and then as wild women or free women, we live as verbs rather than as objects, which is just wonderful. Okay, to speak about this phenomena in a different way, Goddess is in her heaven, that is here in the background, giving us energy for lusty leaps beyond dreary constrictions of the phallocratic foreground flatland. All's right with the background world, which secretly and mysteriously creates opportunities for leaping. So again, here this comes, you know, in much of Mary Daly's writing, is she has this idea that the foreground, this patriarchal foreground that we're trapped in, you can live the whole time in it. And I suppose you would be putting on loads of makeup, going to nail bars, eating plastic food, using plastics, watching television, etc. Being a token woman for the patriarchy, doing the patriarchy's job. But she says there's a background, which she capitalizes, and she is saying that Goddess is in her heaven. Now, she, I don't know exactly, I don't know why she uses the word goddess, although some people in the chat might know. But certainly for me, it works, certainly as a sort of antidote to the God the Father who was drummed into me throughout life. And it's and you know, we've got loads of human belief that of why there might be goddesses, or why we might think of the idea of a goddess. Anyway, she's using that. She doesn't go on too much about goddesses in this, but it is part of her work to mention the idea or the existence of goddesses. Okay, this insight arises from the experience of radical elemental feminists who recognize that the reality which is larger and deeper than patriarchy can transform and use oppressive situations to reawaken the X factor. Define this as the spring of being, the unpredictable, unpossessable nature of the world, which forever escapes the technocrats, medical and scientific researchers, the developers, and other demonic destroyers of living creatures. And then she says, the X factor stroke faculty inspires us to get on with our work stroke play of creating the archaic future. This is our true future, rooted in the archaic past, which transcends the perpetually stagnant state of stagnation and is created by successions of original acts and actions. And as we'll see in the book, this book is about this imagined journey of hers of going into the future and back to the past and meeting feminists from the past and from the future. And it's, I find it, I mean, it's just very beautiful, but it's also, by doing it and by going along with her, it creates strong, strong links that we have. You start having belief in a strong link that our four sisters are with us, and our whatever it is, sisters who come after us are also with us. So there's this interconnectedness across time, as well as we're doing here on this webinar across space. So it's very beautiful and very powerful, and very interesting. So we are profoundly interconnected. How could, and now this is, she talks a lot in this book about nature, animals, and the war on the environment. So it says women and animals and nature are profoundly interconnected. How could anyone not see this? It's essential to see and name the fact that the earth and its inhabitants are now targeted for hideous destruction. Women are life givers. We are targeted by the necrophiliacs, and our work is to be lifesavers, life enhancers. Okay, now I'm jumping ahead. So I think if you need to, you should read it if you to actually get the full experience. So I'm just giving you bits that I found interesting. So to complete the trinity of technological nightmares, there is robotic science, which is moving towards a post-biological future, a champion of this branch of the approaching brave new world. So this Hans Moravec, who in his book maintains that humans will be able to download the content of our brains into mobile, autonomous, self-replicating robots. And our culture will be able to evolve independently of human biology. So this is 2004, she's probably writing, it was 2006 it was published. The horror of the degradation, fragmentation, disintegration that is implied in all of these projects is unfathomable. The profound, irreversible alteration of all life on Earth that is at stake is apparently impossible for most people to grasp. The walls of denial are thick beyond measure. Indeed, it is discouraging to speak about such things and encounter these walls. If we think and speak in ordinary foreground ways, our situation may appear hopeless. And I suppose that's a great thing I feel about Mary Daly, is she takes us into this background and gives hope. Because if you are just thinking we're going to act and we are all trapped in the patriarchal, what she calls foreground, it is incredibly dispiriting. Whereas she's encouraging us to think about this meta-patriarchal background that we and nature and animals live in. Okay, be speaking. So this is the beginning. Auguring, foretelling, speaking of what will be, speaking about a psychic and or material change by means of words, speaking into being. So these words name interconnectedness, which involves trans-temporal, trans-spatial consciousness, communication, sisterhood, conversation, synchronicities, travels. And they signify active participation in the harmony of the universe. What's great is that she's putting us together with the universe, with animals and with nature, and saying that the odd one out are the patriarchs. And at some stage she says that we're a majority, and even, we're a cognitive majority, that there are more elements in the universe that are against patriarchy than there are for it. So we are a powerful force. Wild women's experiences of unseen connectedness also inspire fantastic daring and increasing self-confidence. As travelers and weavers in a participative universe, we increasingly trust our own judgments, even when our reasons are not evident to others. And then she talks about when we learn to sense the presence of fields, spatial structures which exert visible, tangible influence, even though they themselves are invisible, intangible, inaudible, tasteless, and odorless. So I suppose that would be whether you believe that or not, but she's proposing that you could you could sense or believe in those. I think I probably do believe in them, but I guess what she's saying is she's suggesting it might be an idea to think about them, but you can still get loads from Mary Daly even if you don't believe in some of this stuff. Okay. Knowing this context, I think she's been talking about how bad patriarchy is, enables wild women to understand the backlash. The bosses of bulliedom are terrified by our female energy, which she calls gynergy, and its potency to combine with the forms from our archaic past, which we can remember. So put back together again. Our cumulative memories are always available to us, and despite all efforts to dismember us, our desire, determination, and capacity to remember grows. Naturally, stroke unnaturally, the bullies do not understand such wild female power, but they do have cowards' capacity to sense danger and stop at nothing to nip it in the bud. And then I'll just say, jump this bit, and it goes, this is why they have tried to kill our memories and hopes by targeting our books, our bookstores, our publishers, our women-only classrooms, our radical feminist classes and conferences, our women's health networks, our women's restaurants, our other women's spaces. But since wild women are onto such tricksters' dirty tricks and can understand that they are motivated by ontological impotence, we can laugh at them, renew our process of combining gynergy with archaic forms, and, well, fly. It's nice. Okay, now she says she's talking about a sort of goddess, a verb from whom, in whom, and with whom all true movements move. So she talks about this final cause that is an antidote to the Christian and much of patriarchal philosophy. She says that she is, of course, being. Goddess, the verb, is hidden for two reasons. First, there is our condition of living in the foreground, the deadly state of reversal. In this state, our eyes have been dimmed and all of our senses numbed by reversal. I'm not going to read that out, but I'll read the example. The absurd story of Eve's birth from Adam. B, the belief that man is superior to animals. C, the worship of male divinity. D, the belief that the radical feminist worldview is narrow or dated. And then the second reason why the goddess is hidden is the inherent nature of the final cause, who is, but is not yet, who is always unfolding. There's an element of surprise. We who participate in her creation, knowing yet unknowing what we do. So I find that quite useful because it gets rid of God the Father that's been sort of pushed into me. And she does talk more about the dynamic being of our lives and the point of how our lives can unfold. Okay, so then she says radical feminism represents a radical shift of perception away from conventional evolutionary theory, and that conventional theorists saw the unfolding of life as a process in which species diverge from one another. Oh, so this is so conventional theorists is the competition in nature, and then this new things that she's talking about, um, she says it was more continual cooperation, mutual dependence among all life forms as essential to evolution. So she says, as Lynn Margulis and Dorian Sagan state, life did not take over the globe by combat, but by networking. So that's quite nice. So where she talks about some of the theories that our focus is shifting from evolution to co-evolution, an ongoing dance that proceeds through a subtle interplay of competition and cooperation, creation and mutual adaptation. So it's quite a wide-ranging book. Okay, then chapter 5. How are we doing for time? So she mentioned, then she mentioned Susan B. Anthony, who said, so while I do not, in 1870, I do not pray for anybody or any party to commit outrages. Still, I do pray, and that earnestly and constantly, for some terrific shock to startle the women of this nation into a self-respect, which would compel them to see the abject degradation of their present position. So she's starting to bring in past sisters and some of the ideas and making those connections that things that we're thinking about have been thought about before. Okay. Now, this is I think let's just leave that because that's just repeating about shocks and people possibly being moved to action. And then she talks about self-respect, which is elicited when a woman experiences an intuition of being. And now this idea of self is capitalized self being a very important part of Mary Daly's work, that she proposes that we have an inner self, which is our true self, and that we have a sort of patriarchal self, which is created by patriarchy. And if we discover our true self, which is outside patriarchy and beyond and before and above and behind patriarchy, that is just fantastic. So she goes, once you see the grotesque inappropriateness, or you get the intuition of being, you could see the inappropriateness of the degraded position and that we're in, and forces her to break her insufferable yoke of bondage. So acts of seeing and breaking out of bondage, gaining faith in herself, constitute a continuing spiraling process, with each act leading to another. And then she says, moreover, this spiraling movement acts communally as well as individually. And Anthony, a feminist activist, wrote this passage in the plural. The use of the plural is particularly interesting. Communal movement is not merely a collective, rather it is interactive. As participates in being, women act upon each other. The actions of each participant not only spur her on to further acts, but these further acts gynergize other women. And it creates, she calls it a cosmic dance of being, their participation in the creative work of the goddess, or people might say goddessing. So we might experience that in the way she's describing it, or it might be that we experience some of what she's saying as true when we meet other women, going to Philia. Last week we met so many different women, many of us who were able to go, or on these webinars we have these fantastic chats and we're able to experience together a collective participation in the work of goodness or the goddess or whatever. Okay, so she talks quite a lot about the link between the military and environmental problems. And she mentions this article, the major environmental problems: acid rain, ozone depletion, climate change, loss of topsoil, forest dieback, desertification, loss of tropical rainforests, all have military overtones. These combined ecopathologies have resulted in loss of species, increases in the rate of allergies, asthma, cancer, and a greater number of congenitally damaged children. They have produced poverty, urbanization of farmers, and environmental refugees. We know this. It's just well written in my mind that she makes those very strong links between our movement and the environmental movement. Right. She then mentions Gimbutas, Maria Gimbutas, and she says that shortly after Maria, oh, this is quoting Marla, So Marla is saying this. Shortly after Maria Gimbutas died, I had a vivid dream that told me she is now in the realm of the ancestors. She spoke in a fierce voice, saying, "You must remember us." I was shaken awake with the distinct feeling that this dream was not only for me. And so she's talking about our remembering our four-sisters and the importance of that. And then Gimbutas was I think it was an anthropologist who thought a lot about the past. And she's talking about old European society, which preceded patriarchal culture. This is Gimbutas. She maintained that this pre-Indo-European, pre-patriarchal society was matrifocal and matristic. This is Daly speaking. Her choice of the word matristic rather than matrifocal is deliberate because matriarchy always arouses ideas of dominance and is compared with patriarchy. That word can be a real conversation stopper, commented Kate. Yes, I moaned, the words are problematic. I prefer to say gynocratic or gynocentric, which are words that transcend fixation on motherhood without excluding it. There are really interesting bits in this book, so I would definitely recommend you to read it. So there's lots of very interesting ideas that you could spend a bit of time thinking about. So the use of the word matristic or possibly gynocratic or gynocentric maybe could be useful for people worrying about or thinking about what words to use. Okay, now she goes back to the people immerse themselves in foreground distractions to reinforce the state of denial. We are absolutely in that, 19 years after this book was written, there are more and more foreground distractions when it's so obvious that we need to actually think about what's actually going on. And then gender identity ideology being an utter state of denial. So you, Mary, can set an example by your travels into the biophilic era. There are manifestations of the qualitative leaping you've been talking about and writing about for many years, which you've often called quantum leaping, evoking the context of new physics. And then she came and they saying you came up with the idea of lusty leaping. So just so you know, some of this book is a conversations where Mary Daly has gone into the future and she's talking with in a situation of post-patriarchy with women who are living post-patriarchy in the imagined future. And so then so these people like Sophie are actually they're chatting to her in the future, which is quite interesting. Okay, and there's one bit. So Cotty is a cat, I think. Yeah, and so they she's very interested in communication or us being with animals and listening to them and the importance of animals. And in this section, there's the cats around, Cotty the cat. And then she mentions Robert Graves, who in his Greek myths said the transition to patriarchy seems to have come about in Mesopotamia, as elsewhere, through the revolt of the queen's consorts, to whom she had deputed executive power by allowing him to adopt her name, robes, and sacred instruments. It's like very interesting. So I just clipped this out because it's very interesting for now that yeah, Robert Graves, who is a very famous writer about the Greek myths, seems to think that this was the moment. This was the very bad moment when a queen gave power to a man by letting him adopt her name, robes, and sacred instruments. I mean, we really should not be doing that. Okay, now then there's this nice story which I guess lots of people might have heard about anyway, but I'll just read it. So the story of a cow named Emily. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of persons met one particularly magical animal who charged into fame on November the 15th, 1995, after charging out of a slaughterhouse in Hopkinton, Massachusetts, just moments before she would have been murdered. She was a cow who became known as Emily. Emily's celebrated escape from a Hopkinton holding pen was accomplished by jumping over a 5-foot fence. This feat was followed by several weeks of wandering through the snow-covered woods. She was aided by an underground railroad of animal lovers who helped her elude capture for 40 days. And then she was taken in by a animal shelter. So that's quite nice. Nice story of the cow getting away. And she said, oh, she said this, Emily became the poster child for vegetarianism. And she talks a lot about respect and for animals, nature, and all elements, and being part of that, and was a vegetarian herself. Okay, now she's talking about meta patterning, which is another interesting idea. And she said this word was first explained in Pure Lust. And it's the process of breaking through the paternal patterns of thinking, speaking, and acting, weaving the way through and out of male ordered mazes, meta-patriarchal, erratic movement. So that's interesting. Being outside patriarchy. I mean, just the concept that we can be outside patriarchy is fantastic, and then meta patterning, us having these movements which are erratic, deemed erratic and sort of weird by patriarchy. And then it is what they are about. Animals and women become untamed, undisconnected. That's a lovely word, undisconnected. Okay, now there's a bit of an argument in the book about strategizing and tameness, which is very relevant for soc femmes today, who have said, some soc femmes have said to me that they agree with radical feminist ideas, but it's a strategy. So they're just doing their strategy. So I'll read a bit of this interesting stuff that she says about strategizing. It has to do with your association of strategizing with tameness, a quality which we both abhor. And then, because Annie had stopped Mary saying things, you seem to be interpreting my decision to eliminate the last sentence as a timid choice to avoid naming. And then Mary sort of responds a bit and says, or in fact, Annie says, I think this is where my quantum leaping comes in. The leaping is not mere avoidance or escapism, it's a sort of inclusive transcendence. In fact, it's something like what you have called the third thing. Here on Lost and Found, we have found the advantage of having been freed from many of the crippling effects of physical and mental pollution, so we can quantum leap faster and higher and more effectively without being stuck in the sort of dead-end circular pseudo-arguments that characterize so much academic, acadamented theorizing. So I think what Daly's getting at is that sometimes we can do these leaping. We might be in an argument and saying it's one thing or another. And she's saying we can sometimes do quantum leaping and move outside that to change things. And I think that's a very useful concept. We don't need to be stuck in uh, deciding whether strategizing on a particular political thing is good and whether it's tame, and we could just jump into something else. There are quite a lot of bits in this book that are very interesting, like this. So saying postmodern gobbledygook is a type of theorizing that exhausts the brain. And then she says, I think I'll move on because there's some really good bits I want to read to you. Okay, so here she mentions fragmentation, breaking off of friendships, the abandonments, betrayals that were so flagrant and common that many were disheartened and simply withdrew their energies from the cause of women. All of us sometimes felt baffled and confused. The comment I heard most commonly was, I just don't understand what's happening. Wild women were aware of the magnetic field of force that could still be conjured among us. Now, many of us have had this, being absolutely amazed that feminism has betrayed us, does betray us, abandons us, etc. And some of the stuff in Mary Daly is really, really helpful. I mean, she was very much betrayed and abandoned at various times and felt very alone. And I mean, a thing I really like in her writing, I didn't see it in this, is her idea of sort of radical aloneness, that there will be times in our struggle that we really are just alone. And the thing that I like about Mary Daly is that she says that we are interconnected, we still are interconnected, and not to be disheartened. So this fragmented condition is caused by patriarchy. Anyway, for me, if you ever feel that, read Mary Daly, and it could be great. Okay, so I'm just going to see how many more slides we've got. Yeah, we're on 29. Great, because I really want to read. There's one last bit that's, oh, okay, sharing window. I'm going to share it again. There's a lovely bit at the end. Don't want to miss that. Right, so, oh, we've done that. So let's move to the next one. Here we are. Okay. So then this is in the future, she goes, reaching for the copy of Wickedry, which happened to be lying on the gloss. That's her Mary Daly's glossary of lots of words, which personally, actually, I've never been able to read. I've got a copy of it, but I just can't sit through reading lots of words. So I've never managed to read that. But anyway, I think some people might think it's good. Sophie turned on the page of nemesis, and here is the definition. She says, virtue beyond justice, acquired by inspired acts of righteous fury, virtue enabling seers to unblindfolded captive justice, participation in the powers of goddess nemesis, elemental disruption of the patriarchal balance of terror, passionate spinning, spiraling of archaic threads of gynagy. And then Sophie added, Nemesis is the goddess of divine retribution. This hurls our imaginations far beyond the limitations of pedestrian terrain, usually associated with discussions of justice. She goes, I like the fierce content that is introduced by way of naming. For one thing, it brings to the surface the feelings of fury or rage that we all feel about acts. I think it's, oh, okay, it's not. So let's just say the feelings of fury and rage. This is very interesting because so much of patriarchal ideas of justice are patriarchal. They're just you're going to get some sort of very, very limited justice, and then you need to carry on putting up with patriarchy. Whereas this is going a lot further, and by naming patriarchal balance of terror, we're saying we're not going to put up with justice within a patriarchy. We want the whole thing. We want to get rid of the terror. So we're going beyond it. Okay, so now Matilda Jocelyn Gage comes up quite a bit towards the end of the book. And she wrote Women, Church and State in 1880, let's say. And she was, well, I'll read to you what she comes and talks to Mary in this book. And I find this very interesting because I imagine it was very interesting for Mary Daly to have this conversation with Matilda Jocelyn Gage and see where it went. And because it's written down in a book, we can participate in this meeting of two great now four sisters. So it says, Matilda smiled. That's fine with me, Mary. And Mary said, can I read out some of what you've written? So, okay, here goes. And this is Matilda Jocelyn Gage writing. We find those women in whom self-sacrifice has been most apparent have been doing least justice where justice first belongs, to themselves. Justice as the foundation of the highest law is a primal requirement of the individual to the self. Moreover, you stated, so this is Jocelyn Gage, but women is learning for herself that not self-sacrifice, but self-development is her first duty in life. And this is not primarily for the sake of others, but that she may become fully herself. So Mary then says this, and Matilda, I would add to this the exaggeration of self-sacrifice and the conditioning of women is so twisted in its consequences that when we see this, our natural response is the rage or wild fury that can give rise to nemesis. We recognize such religious brainwashing is a hideous crime against women, and we understand more and more deeply the truth of your statement. This, because this came from the book Women, Church and State, was a massive attack on Christianity. So this is Matilda. The most stupendous system of organized robbery known has been that of the church towards women. And then Matilda looked pleased. Mary, I appreciate your acknowledgement of my words. As you know, I have continued always to advocate opposition to the institution which I have identified as that most unscrupulous enemy of freedom, the church. And then Mary says, and Matilda, it's exciting to recognize that you yourself have become a channel of nemesis, a transformative, magical, alchemical force comes from the depth of your understanding, courage, and love for women. This force manifests your participation in the goddess Nemesis and is contagious. Would you give us an example of how contagious Nemesis works? Gladly, responded Gage. As you are aware, my chief life work, Women, Church and State, was harshly attacked after it first appeared in 1893 by the Protestant Anthony Comstock, chief enforcer of the obscenity laws bearing his name, with the cooperation of Thomas Sheedy, a prominent Catholic. I had presented a copy of Women, Church and State to the school library. Comstock threatened to arrest the school board members if they placed the book in the school library. My response to the reporter who wished to know the effect of the Comstock Catholic attack on me illustrates accurately how the goddess Nemesis works. I said, it has acted like a tonic. I have not been well through the summer, not having recovered from overwork on Women, Church and State, but the moment I heard of Comstock's letter and read the falsities so freely printed in regard to my book, I grew better and feel myself able to meet all enemies of whatever name or nature. So that's something really nice, and it's lovely seeing this conversation between these two women across time. And and it's impossible, but it's an imagined conversation, and this recognition by Mary Daly, possibly, I feel like on behalf of many of us, of Matilda Jocelyn Gage's work. Um, and I guess what she's doing is saying these things matter, that we, although we can't actually be with Jocelyn Gage, we, in our imaginations and in terms of justice, we're there. We're there, remembering her and speaking to her, which is, I find, very moving. Okay. Um, then Jocelyn Gage is saying, well, let's look at today. And Jocelyn Gage, they're both saying 2004, 5, what was going on is awful, and saying it's just the same thing. And then Mary Daly says, yes, I'm going to quote the witty feminist writer Gertrude Stein in a piece called Patriarchal Poetry. So, which is, she quotes here, so their origin and their history, patriarchal poetry, their origin and their history, patriarchal poetry, their origin and their history. Patriarchal poetry makes no mistake. Patriarchal poetry is the same as patriotic poetry, is the same as patriarchal poetry, is the same as patriotic poetry, is the same as patriarchal poetry, is the same. Patriarchal poetry is the same, which is great, the sameness. Okay, next one. So we keep going. Oh, we've done that one, so we don't need to do that. Then there's a bit later on where Mary Daly is talking about television and saying one of the ways that patriarchy is damaging women now, well, in then 2005, is television. And so they're saying Gage agreed. I would like to move ahead with the subject of the ways in which television functions as a weapon against women. Judging from my own brief experience with it, this medium involves something like hypnosis, by which I mean an artificially induced sleep-like condition in which an individual is extremely responsive to suggestion. I say this without the benefit of many hours of viewing television, but I believe I'm justified in my quick judgment because of my perception of sameness. Women, like cats, are not the same. As a dangerous weapon of the same, television would be used by patriarchs to attack and destroy the deep differences among women, our core individuality. Am I correct? And then Mary says, I'll say you are, Matilda. I'm anxious to hear how you pursue this train of thought. On the surface, you understand TV appears to offer great variety, but it seems to present us with many role models. But these are deceptively the same. The result for anyone with a spark of aliveness in her is boredom. This wears away the capacity for seeing what's really going on. And very, very interesting, this stuff about role models with, for us now in 2025, these drag queen, whatever, role models, and almost all TV programs, new TV programs these days have a role model for us. The new fantastic role model is a woman who's actually a man, who is a role model, who are now, though these same are men now telling us what to do because the women weren't good enough at it. And I mean, this is me talking, not Mary Daly, but which hopefully you will have got. Right. I think I've only got one more slide. Okay, right, there's two more slides. So this is lovely. So Gage, who'd been listening intently, sat up very straight in a hard wooden chair and said, "And you do have me," she responded fiercely. "Surely you can understand in your 21st century context the statement that I published in 1880 in National Citizen and Ballot Box, a newspaper that I founded and edited. I then wrote, the women of today are the thoughts of their mothers and grandmothers, embodied and made alive. They are active, capable, determined, and bound to win. They have 1,000 generations back of them. The pressure lies not alone in their own veins and arteries, but the hereditary transmission of qualities is making itself felt. Millions of women, dead and gone, are speaking through us today. If we are false to women's demands, we are false to the mothers who bore us. The revenge of time lies in our hands. It's lovely. And Mary says that passage always gives me the chills. You were writing in 1880 of the woman of today, and now, in the desperate today we're in, of the first decade of the 21st century, you're saying those words again, hoping, sorry, I guess that we will finally get the message. May those millions of women speak to us and through us again today. So there is one last slide. And because we've got 2 minutes, I'm going to do it. So I think this is these are the final words in this book. So she's quoting from from Pure Lust, The Virtue of Rage. As she is drawn into the spiraling movement of befriending, a woman becomes a friend to the being in herself, which is to say, centering herself. The intensity of her focus, of her desire, focuses her energy, which becomes unsplintered, unblocked. This focusing, gathering of her dissociated energy makes possible the release of rage. The metamorphosing sage rides her rage. It is her broom, her fire-breathing winged mare. It is her spiraling staircase leading her where she can find her own kind, unbind her mind. Rage is not a stage. It's not something to be gotten over. It's a transformative, focusing force, like a horse who streaks across fields on a moonlit night, her mane flying. Rage gallops on pounding hooves of unleashed passion. The sounds of its pounding awaken transcendent emotion as the ocean roars in its rhythms into every creature, giving birth to sensations of our common sources, courses. Rage, too, makes senses come alive again, thrive again. Great. So there we are. So I am going to stop sharing, and it's the end. It's the end of the webinar. I'll just say that one of my daughters once gave me a lovely compliment. She said, "Oh, Mum, you're in your resting pose." And I went, "Oh, what's that?" Because I was just standing there in the kitchen or something. She just said, "Oh, seething," which is apparently my resting pose is seething. And I know, I mean, so many people would be very offended if their daughter said, "I've noticed that you spend your resting pose is seething," but I was just totally delighted. So, yes, that is my resting pose. I'm seething in the spirit of Mary Daly. So brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. Um, and see you. Well, I haven't managed to even say what's going on next week. Can't do everything. Thank you for coming. I think there's breakout rooms, and see you next week or soon. Bye bye.